With the population of Hiroshima dying rapidly and horrifically in the weeks following the bomb, the city was called a graveyard turned upside down. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the citizens of Hiroshima, Japan were beginning an average Monday morning blissfully normal. Just after 8 a.m., some people saw a plane flying overhead. One man said he knew it was an American plane, as Japanese planes couldn't fly at that altitude, but he thought it was just passing over, as usual. There was nothing usual about that plane. At 8:15, a B-29 warplane, the Enola Gay, dropped the world's first nuclear bomb on a human population. The bomb was codenamed Little Boy and was President Harry S. Truman's attempt to promptly end World War II. When you see the apocalyptic aftermath of the bomb, it's hard to understand what Truman was thinking. In his mind, the choice was between a costly, prolonged invasion of Japan, where countless people would die, or the atom bomb. 9 days after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the Japanese surrendered, effectively ending the war. Charles Meyer, a history professor at Harvard, said that to the Americans, the bomb, quote, seemed to offer a potentially magical solution that would spare a lot of pain. On August 6th, the bomb fell for 43 seconds before detonating at 19,000 feet when two masses of uranium-235 collided inside the bomb, causing a nuclear chain reaction. The resulting explosion was equivalent to approximately 15,000 tons of TNT and caused a mushroom cloud to rise 60,000 feet into the air. On the ground, there was a blinding flash of light, then a deafening boom. Junko Morimoto, who was 13 years old at the time, remembers it this way. My cheek became slightly hot, and then blam, blam, blam. Everything was shining. There was a little pause, and then what I would describe as a terrible roar, more a vibration than a sound, and with that, the house started to crumble on us. I thought to myself, this is the end. I am going to die. I am going to die. At the epicenter of the detonation, and for a mile all around it, there was complete destruction. Buildings, vegetation, people gone. We can't talk too much about these bodies because the heat was so intense, over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 4,000 degrees Celsius, that it incinerated people where they stood. Just bones and carbonized organs were left behind. If a person near the epicenter wasn't killed by the heat or the blast, ionizing radiation killed them immediately. The number of people who died is almost impossible to confirm. Between 60,000 to 80,000 people died in an instant. That's 30% of the city's population. The 4.5 miles around the epicenter was devastated. The parts of the city that weren't immediately destroyed burned for days. Radiation filled the atmosphere. Irradiated material was spread by wind, water, and rain. Residual radiation was everywhere. Those who weren't killed by the initial explosion died of burn-related injuries, of radiation sickness, or were buried under collapsed buildings. Many had patterns of their clothes, stripes, polka dots, flowers, seared into their skin from the extreme heat of the bomb. Something like 140,000 people would eventually die as a result of the atomic bomb at Hiroshima, though many put that number much higher. For generations, survivors and the families of survivors continue to suffer from birth defects and cancer. Many hibakusha, or bomb-affected people, hid that they were survivors so they could avoid any fear or revulsion that came from being marked as a carrier of the after effects of the bomb. But the one thing shared by all survivors of Hiroshima, and Nagasaki for that matter, where a second bomb was dropped 3 days later, killing 74,000 people, is the memory of the dead and the dying. Death was everywhere following the bomb drop. What to even do, how to even handle the sheer amount of dead bodies. The rivers were filled with the dead. many having died desperately trying to get a drink of water and then dying immediately after that drink. Survivors were told not to give the injured people any water, no matter how much they begged, because just one sip to a shocked, burned individual could actually speed up their death. Charred and broken bodies were everywhere, in the streets, under buildings, on playgrounds. Survivors called the injured and dying a ghostly procession. In the darkness that descended from the smoke and dust from the mushroom cloud, injured people walked the streets in confusion, arms outstretched, flesh falling from their bones, covered in blood. Survivor Tomiko Shoji told The New Yorker, "All over was smoke. The entire city was covered with smoke. I saw people coming across the bridge just completely black, covered by blood, coming towards us. The whole city was a sea of fire. And then, at night, it rained black rain. That black rain was a mix of irradiated material and carbon residue from the burning city. It rained down on Hiroshima, black, sticky, staining everybody and everything. The rain contaminated food and water and was ingested by survivors, causing radiation poisoning. Even people who had not been affected by the blast developed difficulty eating and drinking. They threw up dark liquid. They developed petechiae, or small circular patches on their skin, indicative of bleeding happening under the skin. Finding these spots on oneself or others became an obsession, a mark of impending death. People's hair fell out in clumps. Wounds wouldn't stop bleeding, even the tiniest prick of a needle. Flesh rotted around injuries or injection sites, never healing. People's bone marrow, their gastrointestinal tracts, their blood cells, their very DNA had been destroyed or mutated by the radiation. Nobody, not the Japanese, not the Americans, knew exactly what was happening to the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and nobody knew quite how to treat it, this deadly atomic plague. With the population of Hiroshima dying rapidly and horrifically in the weeks following the bomb, the city was called a graveyard turned upside down. Bodies were everywhere, in the streets or rivers, under buildings, clinging to streetcars, in every state imaginable. Some were burned and bloody but intact. Other remains were just limbs or charred beyond recognition. Everywhere life had once been, death now inhabited. Some people took to burning corpses in the streets. Others were cremated at crematories or at an altar that once stood in Hiroshima Peace Park. So many were suddenly cremated when the bomb hit, their ashes just had to be gathered up from the rubble. The sick and dying were sent to a tiny island of Ninoshia, just off the coast from Hiroshima, where a temporary hospital was set up. Unaffected by the bomb, the island served as a refuge for approximately 10,000 patients for 20 days. Unfortunately, since thousands of those patients ultimately died, they were hastily buried on the island in a mass burial mound. 2,000 of those buried bodies were exhumed in 1955 and cremated and transferred to Hiroshima Peace Park. In 1971, further excavation on Ninoshia uncovered 617 more buried victims. Those remains were also cremated and sent to the Peace Park. Of those 617, only 7 people's remains were able to be identified from personal items they were buried with. Since then, approximately 57 additional remains have been found on Ninoshia, but none of them have been positively identified. Almost all of the unclaimed cremated remains of Hiroshima victims are in the Memorial Mound at Hiroshima Peace Park, a memorial to the events of August 6th. On shelves inside the mound are over 800 white porcelain canisters containing the remains of the identified dead. Those 800 are what are left. There were 2,432 sets of remains in 1955, but those canisters have been claimed by family members over the years. But the vast number of cremated remains in the mound are unidentified, and likely never will be. They're stacked in pine boxes behind a curtain, the unidentified commingled remains of over 70,000 people who died because of the bomb. Each box says where the remains were recovered, a school, a crematory, but the identities of the people in the boxes are probably forever to be lost. It is impossible not to be staggered by the horrific loss of life caused by the atomic bomb of August 6, 1945. A bomb, might I add, that pales in comparison to the power of the nuclear bombs we have at our disposal today. Like I said in our video about the attack on Pearl Harbor, in the face of such atrocities, it's important to ask questions. Ask about the dead. Ask about how they died. Ask about why they died. This is not just an exercise in facing mortality, but it's forcing ourselves to face the circumstances in which other people face their mortality. It can be unsettling, but fully understanding the horrors that await us if we cross certain lines might be the only way we can stop the darkest parts of history from repeating themselves. This video was made with generous donations from death enthusiasts just like you. A sincere thank you to those on Patreon who allow us to keep doing this work and improve our videos, including this hopefully continuing series on the dead of World War II.